Hello. Today we're going to look at the invoice and just talk about some basic features that you can use in the invoice as you are figuring out the cost of your trips. The top section of the invoice is just the details of the trip. You can see the school that's traveling, where they're going, the date and the time of the trip, the type of trip, how many hours long this particular trip is. Notice that in the vehicle, you can change the vehicle type or the vehicle number if you needed to. So for example, if bus 186 was scheduled to go, but it wouldn't crank that morning, you can use your change button and go in and put in a different bus that actually did take this particular trip if you'd like to. So you can make sure that the invoice is completely up to date. In the funding sources section, if the funding source was selected in the request form, it will be here. If not, you can choose the correct funding source and it will populate with the account code if that's something that your district uses. If you use multiple funding sources, you're going to share the cost of the trip, you can choose yes on the multiple funding sources and it will give you a second section that you can put in another funding source and share the cost. In your driver cost section here, notice that the driver who was assigned to the trip is here in the invoice, but again, if you needed to change that driver, if Leonard woke up with the stomach bug and a different driver drove on this trip, you can choose the driver that actually went on this particular trip and change to that driver so that again your invoice is accurate, is correct. If you're going to be reimbursing for your driver's time, you can indicate that in the invoice. Notice that you might have these little clock calculators where you can indicate the exact time that the driver started and ended their time, or you can just enter hours if you wanted to just enter hours and not use the clocks. Notice that the driver's rates are here. We can accommodate up to 3 different rates per hour for the driver. So let's go ahead and indicate that Stuart started at 8 o'clock. And so we can use our clock calculator here and enter in that he started at 8 and maybe he worked until about 7 o'clock that night, and so we can choose that he ended about 7:15. If he actually ended at 7:18, and that's important for you to be able to indicate there, you can actually change down to the very minute. Once you have entered in their beginning and end time, if you click the compute button, it's going to give you the decimal of the number of hours that that driver worked. Now, if for some reason you don't use the clock calculators, they're not displayed on your district, or you don't need to have the exact time in there, you can always just enter in a number of hours and in a decimal and 2.5 hours or whatever it might be. If your a district adds in benefits, then that we can also calculate those for you. And then you would just simply click this compute button and see this driver's cost based on the number of hours at a particular rate. Now, it's also possible, I guess, that you may need to pay this driver a different rate than what they're scheduled to be paid. So maybe they for some reason, or maybe it's a holiday or weekend or something, and they're getting a different rate. If you needed to change the rate for some reason, you can easily do that. Just simply highlight the rate of the per hour, and then key in the new rate per hour, and then be sure you click the box beside check to retain, and that's going to hold that change on the request form, and then we can compute that out at the new rate. If you track your hours, or excuse me, if you track your mileage, then you can add that information in the mileage cost section. Notice that the estimated miles is here from your Google Maps interface on the trip request form, and you can bill on that estimate. But if you need to override and bill the actual odometer readings, we do give you a place to do that. Here's the beginning and ending odometer readings, and you would just simply key in the beginning and ending odometer reading, and and it will override the estimate. So here we have where the estimated miles was 59.38. Our actual is going to be 75 miles. So when we click the compute, then it did give us the total miles as the actual odometer reading, and we build on that. If you needed to again change the rate per mile from your way it was set up, you can easily do that again the same way you did your driver. If this one is now $1.25, just be sure you check to retain that change, and then you can compute to see your mileage cost. There are a few other sections here in your invoice that you may utilize, again depending on how your district does business. If you bill based on fuel cost and you have set up the table to do your price, your cost per mile, and how many miles per gallon your vehicles get, then you can calculate your fuel cost in the invoice. Also, we have a couple of sections that have some various information in them: additional vehicle cost and additional invoice cost. Some of you may have a return condition. If the bus is brought back late or dirty, that you can assess a certain cost to that, and that this is set up in a table. Some of you may have a standard fee, and that would be added in, or you can decide to remove the standard fee if that was something that didn't apply to this particular trip. We also have vehicle charges that are just extra charges that you can add in, and it just can be a various amount depending on your need, and that vehicle charge will add in here. There's an additional fee that's just an open field, and if you needed to add in an additional fee for something, that adds in, and all of these things can compute out in your additional vehicle cost. The additional invoice cost also offers lots of flexibility. These are all set up in a table, but you can add in a certain additional invoice cost that you've set up. So if you some of those costs you would select, and it's automatically going to populate with a cost. Others maybe not. Others you might just be putting it in of what the different cost might be, that you would just fill in the rate. So here is this an example that no cost was added, but we're just going to add in what that additional cost might be. And then we'll be sure if we make a change like that, we do check to retain that change, and then of course we can compute to get that cost of that section. Once you've come up with your total cost, no matter which sections you're utilizing, you may only be using one section, you may be using more than one, you come up with your total cost and you can confirm that, and then you'll want to scroll down in the invoice to the payment information section, and notice if you do have funding sources, it will indicate your funding source here, and then you want to simply mark this invoice as approved for payment. And notice when I click that, it's going to put my electronic signature and date and time in the approved by section, so that this invoice now becomes uneditable from someone else outside of transportation. If you are sending this invoice to your school bookkeeper or secretary to write checks, or if this is going to go to a report that's going to eventually end up in your finance office, all of that needs to be uneditable by anyone. So you mark this approved for payment, and that will make this invoice available and visible but not editable. And then just be sure to save it and close it, so that would make this invoice visible to someone down the line. So just be sure you do that. Click your save and close and click OK. So that's the basics of your invoices. Now, your implementation specialist should have worked with you very carefully and very thoughtfully on how you're going to use the invoices. So I'm sure I offered you a lot more information than you actually might be needing. But your implementation specialist should have worked with you on specifically how your invoices are going to work. But hopefully this kind of quick overview of the different sections maybe cleared up any questions that you had about the section that you are going to be utilizing. So I hope you found this tip helpful. Thank you.